Hello and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. This week we're going to do something a little bit different. I would like us to step back and get a wider angle view on the entire Torah. And we're going to talk about wilderness. I find it so ironic that the people called Israel, who have had such strong ties to the land that God promised them, would have as their foundational text the Torah, most of which takes place outside the land. Isn't that interesting? Today I want to highlight two different words for you. The first one is chiasm. So as we consider this sojourn outside the land in the wilderness, we discover there is something really interesting going on in the literary structure of the Torah. I came across this as I was working on my dissertation a number of years ago. Many of you know that I wrote my dissertation on the command not to take the Lord's name in vain, but in order to understand what happened at Sinai, I tried to get a sense for its setting. And on the way, I discovered this curious thing that you miss if you're just dipping in and reading texts in isolation from each other, but that you catch if you're reading the Torah, maybe like in a Bible read-through where you're reading faster or larger chunks of text at once. Have you ever noticed that when you're reading through Exodus, coming up to Sinai, then you get to Sinai and there's lots of laws and lots of instructions about tabernacle, and then you get through Leviticus, and then you finally get into Numbers, and you're out of the ritual text, and you're so happy, and you start to feel like a sense of deja vu. Haven't I read these stories before? I feel like I've heard these things before, just like this. And as I was working on my dissertation, I discovered that there are, in fact, a number of stories on either side of Sinai that kind of have a framing effect around it because they're repeated. Now, these are not the exact same stories repeated. They're different incidents, but they sort of frame Sinai. So the new word that I want to teach you, might be new for some of you, is the word chiasm. And a chiasm is a fancy scholarly way of talking about a literary sandwich. So if you can imagine a sandwich with bread on either side, and then peanut butter on both slices of bread, and then jelly in the middle, that's a sandwich. And we might give a formula for this sandwich that's A, B, C, B, A, where A is the bread, B is the peanut butter, and C is the jelly in the middle. Now, what we discover when we read the Torah is a giant chiasm, or literary sandwich, that unites these 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So I want to focus in on a piece of that giant chiasm by showing you what I saw when I was paying more attention to these wilderness narratives. Okay, so as I was doing my research, I discovered that others had seen these patterns, where on either side of Sinai, you get a mention one time of the provision of quail and manna. So before Sinai and after Sinai, God gives them quail and God gives them manna. Now, we know from later in the Bible that God provided manna every single day for the people that they were in the wilderness, except for on the Sabbath. So there was manna all the time, but the text only tells us about the manna once on either side of Sinai. We also know from Numbers chapter 33 that the Israelites stopped to camp at 42 different campsites. If you count them up in Numbers 33, you get the full itinerary of their desert travels. But when you're reading through the narratives that describe those travels, we only get 6 stops mentioned on either side, 6 times where we're told, and they camped. So 6 before Sinai and 6 after Sinai. Now, I had seen these things as part of my doctoral research, but recently I was reading this book by Michael Morales, Who Shall Ascend the Mountain of the Lord? A Biblical Theology of the Book of Leviticus, and he takes it to the next level. What I hadn't realized is that not only are there things on either side of Sinai, but they're in order to make a literary sandwich, or chiasm. So let me just run you through the chiasm that he points out. And I'll add one because there's something I had noticed that fits his chiasm as well because it's in order. So here's what I'm adding. The angel of Yahweh is mentioned before Sinai and after Sinai. And I should maybe explain now that the Israelites are at Mount Sinai from Exodus 19 all the way till Numbers chapter 10. So half of Exodus, all of Leviticus, and the first 10 chapters of Numbers, they're at Mount Sinai. And so when we talk about the wilderness narratives, we're talking about the few chapters from Exodus 14 or 15 to 19, and then from Numbers 11 and following on the other side. So we have angel of Yahweh mentioned before and after. Then we have the mention of a God providing sweet water and a spring. And then we have water from a rock and water from a rock. And then we have a war with the Amalekites and a war with the Amalekites. And then we have leadership relief for Moses and leadership relief for Moses. And then we have a Midianite family member who gives assistance to Moses and a Midianite family member who gives assistance to Moses. And then we have just right on either side of Sinai, the arrival at Sinai and the departure from Sinai. That's a lot of things in a row that point to an intentional literary design. Now, in case you're feeling nervous about this chiasm, to say that there's literary artistry does not mean that these events are fictional. I'm not saying that these events never happened and somebody made this stuff up. But you'll recognize that when we tell stories, there are lots of different ways to tell a story. We can add in details or leave out details depending on what point we want to get across. And I think that's going on here in the wilderness narratives, that the narrator is being very selective in what he tells so that there's this literary sandwich, this framing effect around Sinai, which is really cool. Okay, so now I want to teach you another word. We've talked about the word chiasm. The next important word that relates to the wilderness is liminal space. Liminal comes from the Latin word limen, which means threshold, and it refers to a space that's an in-between space. You're neither here nor there. If you're standing in the doorway of a building, you're not inside and you're not outside. And liminal space is a wonderful way to describe the wilderness because in it, the people of Israel are no longer slaves in Egypt, but they're not in the promised land yet. They're in this in-between space. One of the most remarkable things about liminal space is the way it changes us. Now, who could have imagined that we are already a full year into a global pandemic, that a year ago we all entered into liminal space. Our schedules changed, our routines changed, the things we were allowed to do changed. Some of us couldn't even get groceries the same way anymore. We couldn't attend school the same way. So many changes. When God brings Israel into the wilderness, he's bringing them into liminal space, and he leaves them there a long time. And part of that is because there is so much about their identity that needs to be reshaped and reformed so that it can more properly reflect the character of God to the nations who are watching. I believe that God brings all of us into liminal space when he wants to reshape us. And I'm guessing that none of us will be quite the same after this pandemic. I'm curious how it's reshaped you and how it's made you rethink your values and your identity. I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. That's all for this week. Next week, we're going to dive into the center of this literary sandwich that I just pointed out to you. We're going to look at Sinai, the Sinai narratives from Exodus 19 to Numbers chapter 10, and I'm going to show you another literary sandwich that's in the middle of this one. It's so fun. Have a great week.